day to you. Dear my secular, freethinker, humanist, atheist, non-believer, rationalist friends, my two friends. Before I start to talk about my struggle for equality, I want to express my strong protest against Anders Breivik's hateful and heinous violence. I do not think there is any conflict between the West and Islam. The conflict is not between the West and Islam. It's not between the East and the West. It's between fanaticism and rationalism, between barbarism and humanism. I was born in a country where married couples want male babies. I was the third child of my parents. Before I was born, my parents had two boys, so I was not an unwanted child. But my childhood was not a happy childhood. I grew up in an anti-women tradition and culture. I was not allowed to do many things that I wanted to do, just because I was a girl. I could not go outside to play football or cricket like my brothers, or swim in a lake, or ride a bike. I could not talk to boys who were not my relatives. I had to stay behind the curtains when male guests came to our house. But I was obviously a privileged girl. My father was a doctor and a secular person. He wanted me to study medicine and become independent. I witnessed the dropout of schools of my female classmates as they were forced to be victims of arranged marriages. I was lucky. My father never wanted me to marry anyone before I completed my education. When I was a child, my mother often forced me to read the Quran, but I could not understand the meaning of the verses that I read. Like other children, I was just parroting words. Our language is Bengali, not Arabic. It was impossible to know the meaning of the verses, for no matter how many times I repeated and memorized them, I had no way of knowing what I was saying. I was told that Allah wanted the Quran to be read in its original language. But this made me all the more curious to know the meaning of the verses. One day, I discovered a book that translated the Quran. I read it for the first time, the whole holy book. And guess what? I became an atheist. I did not need to read any book on atheism or secularism or humanism to be an atheist. I still believe that for the Muslims, the Quran is the best book that can inspire them to becoming an atheist. Before discovering what the Quran really said, there were some incidents that helped me to become agnostic. I was, as far as I remember, never a believer. When my mother gave me the horrible description of hell, I shivered with fear. She always said, Allah is merciful. I could not understand how a merciful great God could punish his creatures with hell only because they did not pray to him or were not born in a Muslim family. My mother used to tell me that Allah knows everything. But when she asked me to pray, and I had to utter the verses in Arabic, I was reluctant to do it. For I did not understand the Arabic verses of the Quran. If I was going to pray, I wanted to pray in Bengali. really angered my mother. When I asked very innocently, "Mom, if Allah knows everything, then why doesn't Allah know Bengali?" Mother was embarrassed and angry with me. I asked some of my relatives, and they got angry with me also. One day, as I kept reminding my mother about Allah's ignorance, she replied, "If you say anything bad about Allah, your tongue will fall out." I was 8 and had no idea that anyone's tongue could do that. So I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and said, "Allah is the son of a bitch. Allah is the son of a dog. Allah is the son of a pig." All the slang we commonly use in Bengali. Then I became worried. Maybe my tongue would really fall out. However, a minute passed, then 2, then 5 minutes, and my tongue was still there. I understood that I could say anything about Allah and my tongue would stay in my mouth. I understood my mother was wrong. It was easy for me to become an atheist. I was a student of science, so it was hard to accept that the sun moves around the earth, that the moon has its own light, and that the purpose of mountains is to support the earth so that it will not fall down. I came to suspect and to be sure that the Quran was not written by someone who had any knowledge of science. Not only did I read the Quran, I read the Hadith, the words of Muhammad. I found different events of Prophet Muhammad's life in which, when he had problems, Allah was able to solve them right away. For example, when he was sexually aroused after seeing his daughter-in-law, Allah sent him a message saying that he could marry her because as his son was adopted, he was not his real son, so that marriage was therefore permitted. Further, he created a new law that Muslims are not allowed to adopt any children. Muhammad married 13 times. One of his brides was Aisha, a 6-year-old child. Allah, he said, told him that he was allowed to enjoy his wives, his female slaves, and all the captive women he possessed. He put his beautiful young wife Aisha in a veil because he did not want his friends looking admiringly at her. Allah, he said, told him that his friends should not just go to his house anytime they wished, but if they go, they should not look at any of his wives or ask any of them for anything or any favors. Muhammad was so jealous that he consequently introduced the veil for his wives and ultimately for all Muslim women. Even though marrying a widow was legal at the time, he made it illegal for anyone to marry any of his wives after his death. It became clear to me that Muhammad had written the Quran for his own interest, for his own comfort, and for his own fun. When I studied other religions, I found they too oppressed women. As I grew up, I realized that, like other religions, Islam is not compatible with human rights, women's rights, freedom of expression, and democracy. There is no way in a real democracy that separation of religion and state can be neglected. There is no way we can enjoy human rights if we allow religious rules to regulate society. Freedom of expression must include the right to be different and to offend people, a fact most of the people in many countries do not know and do not believe. Without the right to offend, freedom of expression cannot exist. And without freedom of expression, a democracy cannot be a true democracy. As I grew up, I became aware of women's human rights. I believe that Islam does not consider a woman to be a separate human being. Man was the original creation and womankind was created secondarily for the pleasure of man. Islam considers a woman as a slave, a sexual object. Women's role is to stay at home and to obey her husband. Women are considered weak, so they should be taken care of. Their body and mind, their desire and wishes, their rights and freedom must be controlled by men. Islam treats women intellectually, morally, and physically as inferior. In marriage, Islam protects the rights of men and men only. The Quran gives total freedom to man, saying, "Your women are as your field, go unto them as you will." Women are told to run to their husbands wherever they are, whatever they do, it is their duty. The hadith says that two prayers that never reach the heavens are, number one, those of the escaping slaves, and number two, those of the reluctant women who frustrate their husbands at night. Islam considers women psychologically inferior. Women's testimony is not allowed in cases of marriage, divorce, and hudud. Hudud are the punishments set by Islamic law for adultery, fornication, adultery against a married person, apostasy, theft, robbery, and so forth. If any woman is raped, she has to produce 4 male witnesses to the court. If she can't, there is no charge against the rapist. In Islamic law, the testimony of 2 women is worth that of 1 man. In the case in which a man suspects his wife of adultery or denies the legitimacy of the offspring, his testimony is worth that of 4 witnesses. A woman does not have the right to charge her husband in a similar manner. Women are not allowed to inherit the property on equal terms with their brothers. In the case of inheritance, Allah says, "A male shall inherit twice as much as a female." And after all the rights and freedom, after obtaining all the sexual pleasure and having the pleasure of being the master, Allah will reward men with wine, food, and 72 virgins in paradise, including the wives they had on the earth. Allah said, "They relax on luxurious furnishing, and we match them with beautiful virgins. Near them shall be blushing virgins with large, beautiful eyes who will be like hidden pearls." And what is the reward for the pious woman? Nothing. Nothing but the same old husband, the same man who caused her suffering whilst they were here on earth. As I grew up, I kept observing the condition of women in our society. My mother, for example, was a perfect example of an oppressed woman. She had been given into marriage when she was but a child. And she was a good student in school, but she was not allowed to continue her studies. My grandfather and my father did not want her to study, for what they wanted was for her to be a good housewife, a good mother, a good caretaker. In our house, I grew up with much fear, as I had to keep inside my heart all my desire for freedom and curiosity for what was happening in the outside world.